The world was created by an evil god using logos. This is one of the versions of the Gnostic early Christianities. Especially we can find it in the Nag Hammadi scripts in the Valentinian Gnostic tradition. Now let me jump a little bit more into the future, 2000 years after the Second World War, and when all the atrocities of Hitler's Nazi Germany were discovered. It opened a theological and philosophical discussion whether God really is almighty and if there are limitations to the power of God, because people try to grasp how a God who is good in nature can allow these atrocities that have happened with millions and millions of people killed under the worst circumstances. And little did they know that the amount of people that Hitler cruelly killed, 10 times of that, probably, because no one really knows, were killed by Stalin. And what Stalin did, twice so much, Mao Zedong killed. So the question of the limitations of power of God became a philosophical point and theological point in the aftermath of the Second World War. And this idea that the world was created by a lesser being goes back millennia. We have it in the Gnostic Christianities, but if I recall correctly, the Hermetic studies I did more than 20 years ago, I'm pretty sure I recall that even before Christianity sort of expressed and took over this idea, that it was already in the Hermetic traditions of ancient Egypt. And even the use of logos in the starting phrase of this video shows that this goes into probably the Ptolemaic times in Egypt, where, after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, it was ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty, and there was a strong interconnectivity, especially on the religious side, between the Egyptian mythology and the Greek one, because that's one of the sort of advantages of polytheistic religions, that they are rather inclusive than exclusive. So they really had no problems in assimilating gods and goddesses from one to another, and that's how we have Greek names to certain Egyptian deities, and they have been as well worshipped or became a part of the tradition in respective areas. And I will make a separate video on king born to man who became God, and to whose kingdom I can stake the thesis that the Bible was written in Greek, and that would be Alexander the Great. And I will make a separate video. It's an amazing story. People learn about his life, but they don't really know about him become the deity of Egypt. But going back to the Egyptian part that predates Christianity, so we have several creation myths in Egypt, which are basically the same in foundation with what we find in the Old Testament. The creation is made by God expressing himself. Now, some of those, because you have the Heliopolic and then the Thoth myth and so on, so there are several myths, and Egypt was not canon focused, so everybody has his own version, and it wasn't canonic overall. But what it is about is the self-expression of God in some of the myths through words, so he speaks himself and the universe becomes, and others it's basically an autoerotic act that turns the creation. But from a rather hermetic perspective, both are expressions, and in this sense expressions are language, whether verbalized or not. So the idea that the universe was created in language, logos, by a god is basically the same in the ancient Egyptian myths as it is in the myth of the Old Testament, taken over then by Christianity. Now, what does this actually mean, and why is it important? So, with this Gnostic perspective, they try to answer the very human question, not just of meaning human in life and existence, but of suffering. It goes into this philosophical question: if God is really good, why is there so much suffering on the world, and why is he not intervening to save people praying and innocent children? And this becomes a theological and philosophical question, and the answer to the Gnostics would be yes, because the great God isn't the God that created the world. The world was created by a being in the image of God that in his own ignorance thought he is the highest being and created the world, like I said, with the word, with logos. And therefore the world is imperfect and suffering is in a place. And now this is the mystical perspective of this theology, because it then becomes a mystical dimension. Basically what it is about is the individual way out of suffering through piercing out of the realm of evil. So the realm of evil would then be the material world, and the piercing out is really the transcendence. So the mystical perspective here is that this type of religion asks not to be a believer in a sense of obedience only, but to have faith in a sense of seeking. Oh, this is a beautiful dead tree. Oh, sorry for the tree. So it basically says in his philosophy that seeking God means transcending into the realm beyond the material in the human dimension. That means transcending ego, and even when the Gnostic Christianities didn't really caught up or were suppressed, or however we want to take it, basically disappeared in the predominantly later Catholic and Orthodox traditions that haven't taken over this narrative. We can see in the Middle Ages, for example, the mystics of the Middle Ages, that they go back to the point and intuitively. I don't think they have studied those texts, because, like I said, we have the scripture from the Nag Hammadi finds, which have been hidden and preserved. So I try to make the thesis that the mystics of the Middle Ages of Christianity, especially the female ones, that they haven't really read this text, but their method of leaving the ego behind to reach the beloved are, from a philosophical point, exactly the same as, to me, from a say, mystical interpretation this Gnostic story is about. So it's not about to be taken literally, but it's about understanding that the suffering in the world has its meaning, and it's natural to the world, and that the answer lies within everyone's own. Like in my often quoted Gospel of Thomas, that the kingdom of the Father, the kingdom of heaven, is rather outside you and inside you than in and now I'm freely interpreting, than in constructions of wood or stone. So what the Gnostics have been pursuing was this transcendence beyond the God creator into the true heavens, the true God, true good that lies beyond the material world and can be experienced then mystically. That's my interpretation. Right? And I mean, if you think about it from the perspective of the natural human questions, how can it be that with God being good, the world is so full of suffering and evil? One of the very often theological answers is because, you know, we cannot understand the ways of God, and therefore we cannot judge them, and they are good. But it depends if this answer, I would call it a response. I wouldn't really call it an answer. Depends individually how you approach it. To me, it's an excuse. It's not an answer. But then I am agnostic, right? I love to study these traditions. I love to dive deep into them. But then I understand them as limited by the time and culture and language they have been created in, and I see them as inspiration, but not as absolute revelation. Therefore, my interpretation and approach is again an individual one, and everybody should think for himself and make his own research, which I encourage as well. Go in, have a look on the Valentinian Gnostic Christianity, being one of them, which are talking about this Demiurge creator. It's not just there. There have been more historical references to this concept, basically. So, looking at the world, trying to find the answers, I think there is something convincing about this idea that the Gnostics came up, and I believe it's understandable, especially at the time where medicine was not so developed, evolved, and antibiotics were not existing, for example. Death was really much closer to the everyday human's life than we have it in the most part of the worlds today, especially in the Western ones, where death is basically completely segregated from the daily life. That was different at that time, and people tried to understand it and tried to find a way how to live. And that's where the Gnostics, I think, have their place. I don't want to go into the theological dimension of this. There is and was an ongoing discussion. I'm pretty sure some of the churches have been revived and tried to go back into and follow up the Gnostic tradition. But it's a reoccurring theme, and it is one that could be one of the answers to the huge questions that humanity had after the world wars, especially after the Second World War. On the individual form, for each individual, the interesting is that it's not just a cosmological answer to how the universe was created and how it's governed, which is a reoccurring question that we have all the time. And the Egyptians had their, call it universal thesis. This would be the Gnostic. You have other religions, and nowadays we are trying to find the theory of everything, which should bring the same answer the same question. It will bring a different answer, but it's the same question. How is the universe created? How is it governed? What is the place of human? Physics try to answer this. Then the philosophers will take over and they will say, they will put the part of what is the place of human into it. Ultimately, what should be as well kept in mind is this is a question of a human who tries to answer it with human tools, language, thinking, and extended tools of perceptions, which are machines that we have created, which bring us deeper into the cosmical space as well as the subatomic. But in the end, we are still limited in the understanding and perception of the human brain and consciousness. And we ask questions and we find answers within the limitation of our human existence. And it is sort of a human arrogance that puts us in the center of the universe, where we think that we are the pinnacle of creation all and everywhere in the space, I mean, maybe even in the multiverses, and that we are the ones to find the answer, and the answer to be definite. We never had a definite answer. So contrary to this sort of ignorance, there is the path of a mystic who experiences, he may have experienced beyond questions and answers, but then not gets attached to it anyways, because understands that ultimately and in the end, whatever we experience, we are still humans.